Pauline is Advocacy Campaign Manager in the Irish Heart Foundation. So, with a background in marketing, Pauline's career and life took an unexpected turn with a tour. Took an unexpected turn for the worst when, after the birth of her third baby in 2012, she experienced a torn artery in her heart called SCAD, which was subsequently misdiagnosed, resulting in repeat heart attacks, cardiac arrest, emergency open heart surgery, and a diagnosis of heart failure. In 2022, Pauline, who still lives with heart failure, was appointed as Advocacy Campaign Manager at the Irish Heart Foundation to advocate for both heart and stroke patients in Ireland at a national level. And today she'll be talking to us about advocating together for the visible and invisible challenges of a stroke. So we're delighted to have you, Pauline. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor to be here, honestly, and to hopefully, through my talk today, bring maybe a little bit of hope and encouragement to any of the patient community here, or indeed if there are any professionals listening as well. Hopefully it'll be a positive talk for them as well. So will I get going then? Is that the best?
Can I ask before you do? Sorry, who's running? I've forgotten the girl's name that's running this.
Yeah, Geraldine, is it? I can see you there.
Yeah, I just wanted to say to you, you might want to switch it off. This meeting is being transcribed for AI Companion. You might want to turn that off before we start. I think it's something that's set on your. It says the meeting is being recorded.
There, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Just so AI Companion. I'll do it there now. I didn't even realize it was on. Thank you very much for pointing that out.
Yeah. Sorry for interrupting
you
there.
Stop now. No, that's perfect. Thanks. Thanks, Geraldine. Pauline, whenever you're ready. Yeah.
Okay.
Cracking. Thanks.
So hopefully everybody can see my slides. Okay, so when I was asked to do the talk, you know, as Fiona mentioned, I'm a patient first of all, and I'm also an employee of the Irish Heart Foundation. And anytime I'm asked to do a talk, you know, I can't mention one without the other, and one without its influence on the other. So I thought today, bringing a kind of a patient perspective and hat to the table, as much as an employee, I sort of thought I'd look at this talk as a path going from surviving to growing to empowering and to progressing. What I would say is the patient journey in general. So I'll start with the surviving bit. So as Fiona mentioned, I had an event in 2012 and it was a complicated affair. There was misdiagnosis involved, which led to further problems. And when I look back at it now, I would say that I survived physically, but I was absolutely drowning psychologically. And I'm going to share with you a picture of me. This is in May 2012. And, you know, to all intents and purposes, I maybe in that photo, I look calm and happy, which in many ways I was. I had just survived what you'll see there is the medical presentation, a sudden cardiac condition, a misdiagnosis, multiple heart attacks, cardiac arrest, resuscitation, open heart surgery. And then after all that, I was told that there was so much damage done to my heart that I had the heart of a 70-year-old. And I was 38. I'd just given birth to my third baby. And I had a 7-year-old and a 9-year-old at home as well. And, you know, they said, we think we should implant an ICD, which is a defibrillator. And I was shell-shocked. I was, you know, even though I was happy to be home with my daughter by May of 2012, what I've sort of put down here, you'll see on the right, is just what on the inside, it felt like. And on the inside, these are the thoughts that really ran through my head every day. I definitely thought I was going to die every day, and that went on every day for at least 2 to 3 years. I was absolutely grief-stricken and terrified that my children would not grow up with a mother. And, you know, even though I'd had all of the interventions, I suppose when they told me that my heart function was, you know, around 20%, I had faith in what they had done, but I realized that what was left wasn't in great shape. I was definitely traumatized from the succession of events. I was incredibly lonely. I cannot describe how lonely, and I had a brilliant family around me. I had neighbors calling in. I had all of that. But I remember thinking, nobody is in my shoes except me. Nobody. I don't know anybody in this who's 38 and has a heart problem and could die. Certainly, I was mentally weary and depleted, and I was definitely also mourning for the what could have been because I had two little boys. My daughter had arrived. It was the perfect, situation, and now thrown into the mix was this fear, this genuine fear that life could be over any day and that the devastation this would cause for my family and my children would be enormous. So, you know, looking at that lady holding her baby there, you might not think all of what was on the right was going on inside. And a lot of people, because I had been treated at that point and discharged, people would say to me, "Oh, you must be delighted now that you're out." And I was delighted I was out of hospital. But really, the invisible element was realizing that whole tsunami of emotion that was going on the inside that nobody really knew about. So I lived like that for a good 2 to 3 years. I tried to support myself. I didn't know anybody. I was not in contact with the Irish Heart Foundation at that stage, didn't even know anything about patient support services. I went to my checkups. I tried to do my walking and my eating right and anything I could think of. Read books, tried to nourish my brain. But it was a mountain inside of me that I was trying to battle every day. Over time, with some of the work I did, and I went to therapy, I went to counseling. With some of that work, I began to get to a bit of a better place. And also, I was on a lot of medication and it started to improve my situation a little bit physically. So my heart function was beginning to elevate a little bit. And so after about 6 years, and it really was 6 years, I was speaking to my cardiologist one day and I said, "Look, I things are improving a little bit. I don't feel like I could be somersaulting or cartwheeling, but things are improving a little bit. And I really feel like I would love to help other patients who've gone through this." But I had no idea how to do that. And he suggested that the Irish Heart Foundation might be a place to go. And he actually went to the trouble of writing to the Irish Heart Foundation for me and said, this is somebody who's been through so many different things, and I think potentially there's an opportunity where she might be able to do something for, other patients. So at that point, I was introduced to the Irish Heart Foundation, I suppose, and very quickly, a lot of things, a lot of opportunities, if you like, and a lot of, I suppose, opportunities to connect, first of all, with other patients began. And that was an incredible transformation for me. Finding people like me it was like that kind of walking through the desert and suddenly you see, that little kiosk with water. It was incredible. And also I started to begin to meet with patients of my own age. Again, incredible for me. They were at similar life stages, young families, and trying to navigate being a mother and trying to navigate minding themselves and the challenges that it brings when you've got that kind of duality going on. So meeting patients was brilliant, but then a kind of a succession of opportunities came as well. And some of them were in relation to being willing to share my story, which I absolutely was willing on the basis that it might help somebody else. But there was also opportunities to do things like use my old skills. My background was in marketing, so I was always into kind of communications and designing and things. So I did a newsletter for patients. I was asked to do interviews, in relation to specific things that were of relevance to the patient community I was part of. And I found through all that almost a sense of being energized for the first time in a long time. Life had been a slog. I was trying to up my heart level. I was trying to improve life. And I was sort of surviving, but I certainly hadn't been thriving. And now this gave me a new lease of life and it gave me a purpose. And I began to find that, yes, while sharing my story, I could get a bit choked up at times. Overall, I found it actually very healing for me because it felt like it was diluting what was a very intense feelings, that I'd had about everything that had happened. And it seemed to me like when I spoke about it, I got a certain release from that intensity, and also a great feeling that maybe this would do some good somewhere. Particularly, I felt the advocacy space was one where I kind of really found myself feeling most at home. And that's not to say I enjoyed any patient support work I did, and anything I was asked to do, I enjoyed it really. But I liked the idea of trying to advocate for change and to advocate to audiences that could influence change. And that could be healthcare professionals, or it might be politicians, or it might be through the media. But I found that the sense that this is not just going to be a story that goes nowhere, but that can actually implement something or be part of implementing something, I found that very empowering. And so I just thought I'd put a slide of a variety of things. It doesn't encompass by any stretch the totality of it. But I volunteered with the organization for about, as I said, 2018 to 2022. And I did lots of things over that time. And then an opportunity came up in 2022 to actually take on potentially a role to develop a kind of a patient advocacy, grassroots reach from the advocacy department. And by that stage, I'd been doing so much volunteering. I felt I was giving a substantial amount of hours. All my children were at school by then, and I kind of thought, yeah, maybe it's worth giving this a shot, and see where it goes. And I suppose since 2022, working as a professional in the area, again, it has provided a degree of purpose to everything that came before it. And I find it personally very empowering. But I have the new joy now of working with other patients who I bring along on a sort of an advocacy journey, and to watch them blossom through their process from kind of, as I would say, darkness to light in terms of that isolation piece, and loneliness that they have at the beginning and fear, and seeing how they're turning that in their lives into something constructive and positive through advocacy. It's so enriching for me just to even be part of that with them. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about progressing, and where the likes of the opportunities and the empowerment that was offered to me is available to other heart patients, and other stroke survivors. And I work with both. And to be honest, one of the things I've discovered, while our conditions, might be slightly different, and mine were very much related to the pump, and how the heart functioned. For stroke survivors, I know the predominant issue involves the pipe work, as I would call it. And But what I've discovered over time working with both communities is really it's the life after that can be so similar because the challenges faced can be so similar. So I just want to kind of give a little bit of background to this, and then I'll go into what we're doing in advocacy. So again, open to all, and maybe many of you already, here today have been through the system the Irish Heart Foundation offers by way of support, and there are phenomenal supports, and I wish I had known about them and had access to them way back in the dark days when I was so isolated and lonely. Um, Everything from, counseling to meeting fellow patients, which, as I said, for me was medicine in itself, right through to doing courses, and even to doing the advocacy course, the Patient Champions course, which is available. So there's a whole plethora of supports available. And I would say to anybody here who is a patient who may have signed up for the talk, but maybe haven't signed up for the services, I would so recommend them because there's ongoing learning and the learning doesn't stop, for any of us, me included. But also, if there's any professionals watching this, to be aware of this for your stroke survivors that you come into contact with. We know that our medical professionals are brilliant at treating the medical aspect of our condition, and that's vital. But there are a whole load of, I suppose, ancillary supports we need because we're not just the mechanics, we are the psychology, the headspace, the thinking, the emotions. We're the people who, have to pay our mortgages and our bills after the event. We're the people who have to be part of families. So, all those areas can be particularly challenging because, like I mentioned in the first slide, you have a medical team to deal with the medical aspects, but to deal with all these other aspects, you don't really have any support. So that's why linking in with services like the Irish Heart Foundation, I would advise for any professional, please put your patient community in touch with them. And again, many of you might be aware, as I mentioned, there's information, courses, social connectivity, psychological support through all of these. I've just put up a sample of some of the supports that are available. And I know that Fiona and Julie and Michelle here, who are also working for the Irish Heart Foundation, can expand on all of these. But it's just to give you a flavour of what is available. And because of so much of that being online as well, there's great access no matter where you live in the country, which again is a blessing. Personally, I live in County Clare, so it's brilliant to think that I could still tune into talks that are relevant. So that's patient support, and now I'm going to sort of tell you about patient advocacy and what we do. And I suppose the best way to say it is we offer patient representation and empowerment opportunities to use patient voice and that lived experience to improve patient outcomes. That might seem all very long and jargony, but really what it's saying is we have a patient community. In Ireland, we estimate about 600,000 people live with either a heart diagnosis or a stroke, post-stroke. Of that 600,000, the estimates vary, but there's a view that there's around 90,000 people living with post-stroke. Now, I say estimates because in Ireland, unfortunately, our data records or data registries are pretty kind of non-existent. So we have to estimate based on prevalence rates in other countries, and we match it to our census of population. The last census we had was 2022. So we've worked on trying to estimate the numbers for different counties in Ireland. What we know about it, probably again, measurement or the lack of information on measurement plays into this. But what we do know is that our patient community, they're the biggest stakeholders involved in the healthcare area. But often they're the ones with the least voice, the least ability to share the experience back into decision making in relation to, we'll say, services, and in particular in relation to stroke services. We're aware that A lot of the time, there are decisions made, in professional settings about stroke services. But we know that in order to get a really good, workable service, we need to have patients involved in decision making, from research through to focus groups, through to co-designing services, and to appraising them. So one of the reasons we exist in advocacy is to keep bringing that point home, and also to provide our patient community now, which I will refer to on and off as stroke patient champions. These are people we've trained in advocacy, to give them opportunities to get into the rooms, to do these things. So we do a lot of direct advocacy, but also championing our patients as suitable for advocacy and for being in those rooms. But the other thing we really need to highlight in advocacy is, as I mentioned, the medical needs are significant, and we know that when a stroke survivor is discharged, they need support in the community with speech and language therapy, physiotherapy, occupational therapy. So we need to fight, because those services are not always readily available. So we need to fight for those services, but we also need to fight for the services that support that invisible struggle. And they're the items I've sort of highlighted there: the psychological, the social isolation, the economic challenges, and sometimes even the familial challenges or relationship challenges that can come out as a result of trying to integrate stroke. So we're really trying to just shine a light on, this is the life of this patient, this is the experience of this patient, and it's very relevant to how we provide services going forward for this community. Some of the issues that come up, and I again stress it's some, our patient community will tell us, they had no proper discharge plans, they had no proper services in the community when they went home, that maybe they could only link into online services through the Irish Heart Foundation, but they couldn't access, or they didn't have information even on how to access their therapy post discharge. We also hear, that there's issues with people referring people into charities, even as regards getting online supports. As I mentioned, we also hear that, some stroke survivors feel that they've never been included in the decision making, that they're just sort of told what's next, or, down a pathway that they have found difficult, but that they haven't had any recourse to feedback. We hear that communication isn't good, the communication channels aren't good. And then for those, who are trying to navigate social welfare, or perhaps they're trying to return to work, we hear that, that in itself can be a difficult process, managing employers and policies, and maybe sometimes a culture in an employment situation that isn't super friendly to their return. And we also hear about the fact that, nobody seems to know, or there isn't enough research in the area. So these are just some of the issues we know that our stroke survivors face in the community. What we have done to try and work with these as an advocacy department, I suppose you'd say, we try to highlight that not only is the current stroke community high, but we also have projections that it will increase by up to 60% by 2035. And that is going to put an enormous pressure on our services that already are kind of quaking, to be honest, hospital and outside of the hospital settings. So we have to keep talking about that. And we talk about that, in Department of Health meetings, in HSE meetings. We're constantly, to our politicians when we meet them, we're constantly repeating that message. And advocacy very much is about repeating the message, because, once only isn't usually enough. You have to keep reminding people of that. And we also advocate in other ways, like I said, like mentioned here, implementing the stroke strategy, getting patients involved for the co-design of the next one. And we're very passionate about that, because, we recognise that often our strategies, because there would be, more of a professional structure to them, they may miss what happens in that post-discharge period. And that's why the patients really need to be involved in designing the strategies. We want more of the neurorehabilitation teams filled, and we work with the Neurological Alliance of Ireland to try and implement that. We work in Europe as well, and I'll be talking about some of those specific advocacy measures we're doing as regards the Stroke Action Plan for Europe and things like that. We work a lot on economic reform opportunities, be that through social welfare, because again, that's an area of difficulty for our stroke survivors, or indeed, as I mentioned before, in terms of trying to work with employers and advocate for disability employment and for opening, their minds and their doors to people post-stroke. And generally in disability measures. And again, we have alliances with the Disability Federation of Ireland. We need to encompass more disability into our society and communities in general, not just in the employment stage. And we also call for a lot of research and education into the unknowns, areas that we know exist, but we don't have enough information. So we know that a lot of our stroke community present with non-fast symptoms. And by fast, I mean the traditional face, arms, speech, symptoms. So we need to explore, how do we expand the knowledge and awareness around other symptoms of stroke, and also then, home supports, what are needed, but we need more research on these. So how do we go about all this advocacy that I'm talking about? We have a number of ways of doing it. We speak to politicians, and I suppose this, as we all know, governments are where decisions are made. So we lobby not only people in government, but we lobby other politicians in opposition as well, because they can sometimes be the drivers of questions, parliamentary questions, which we often, suggest wording for, so that they can get answers for things. And we've had a lot of success with advocating to politicians, especially since we brought our stroke patient champions and our heart patient champions into the rooms with us to do political advocacy. And I've just put up some examples there. The first image here, I'm not sure if you can see my mouse, but I'm pointing here to the image on the left. This is where we got, with the work of our patient champions at the ground level, and ourselves, we got a number of politicians to sign up to support the patient support services I mentioned we run earlier, being funded by government, because we had been running them as a charity from reserves for a long time, and we desperately needed public or government funding in order to continue to provide them to patients all over Ireland. So we worked together very much on that, and that collaboration really helped politicians impress that upon the Minister for Health, that this was a crucial area for all their communities all over Ireland, that stroke survivors and heart patients had access to psychological help, to peer support, as run by the Irish Heart Foundation. And that led to some success. It didn't cover all the costs of running our services, but it certainly led to some success. But we also petition them, for example, on disability rights. You'll see there on the right, we had a meeting with Michael Moynihan, who was the head of the Oireachtas Committee on Disability in the last government. And, they are all our stroke survivors with me there on the day. And in fact, it was actually, the meeting was generated by one of our stroke survivors, who is his constituent. So we very much lobby politicians, and our asks of them is, please approach the Minister, please ask questions about this in Leinster House or in the Seanad. Please keep these issues on the agenda. And we give them briefing information, we give them stats, we give them evidence, we give them patient experience. We're giving them a total preparation about the issue. And it is very effective. And my boss and colleague, Chris Macy, does an enormous amount of this as well in Europe. In fact, Ireland has become quite a leader in Europe in terms of stroke patient advocacy. So I just wanted to include that as well. The other way we advocate is through encouraging a lot of our of third-party institutions like the Royal College of Surgeons Ireland, or other universities, or any opportunities maybe through HSE even, to include patients in focus groups when they're about to embark on something new, or to help co-design. And I've just given a few examples there where the Royal College of Surgeons are, they're developing research on life after stroke. What are the best guidelines and practices that should be employed? And they've had stroke patient champions involved both in the research, but also in specific elements of the research that have required further study. An example being the economic output or the economic implications of stroke. The HSE there as well, they're developing an app. I'm sure everybody's heard about it in relation to digital advocacy, and we have some of our patient champions involved in that as well. They're just two examples, but it's to give you a flavour. We also encourage those who do any auditing or reviews to also have patients in the room. And we have here one of our stroke patient champions this year was selected to be a patient representative in the NOCA stroke audit, which is where they look at stroke year on year. What are the figures, what are the outcomes, etc., etc. So she'll be able to feed back her perspective as a patient on that. And we have other patient champions in roles similar to that, and in sort of overview bodies in relation to all of these auditing reports as well, to fight for greater patient participation, more patients in the room, etc., etc. We advocate through the media. And again, these are all stroke patients here who have talked about their experience of stroke. And some of you will know them, I'm sure, but they're from all over parts of Ireland. And again, our stroke patient champion community is diverse. It's from all different counties in Ireland. But through the media, they can talk about the issues that need highlighting. And getting the public behind us on those issues is very important as well, because again, the public are also constituents in those areas where we're talking to politicians to try. So it's almost like you're asking the patient, but then their wider community to support, and their politician to support the endeavour that you're trying to fight for them. We advocate through medical conferences and educational bodies, lecture series. UCC have had some, and we've had our lovely Cork stroke survivor, one of them. We've many lovely Cork stroke survivors, and lovely stroke survivors from all different counties, might I add. So I'm not seen to be having any favourites. But yes, they would go into medical lectures where they're students, and they would talk about their experience, and they would say, please remember, when you're working in the field, when you've graduated and you're working, please remember these items when you meet your future stroke survivors. Similarly, through the HSE, I have opportunities where I can engage because I am an employee of the organisation, and I'm always pushing for more patient inclusion in all the work that they do. And we also advocate through submissions to consultations and policy areas. And this is a collective effort. And again, it's in collaboration. All of these projects now that we run are in collaboration with our patient community. So there's always their feedback brought into it. Disability reform, anybody, I'm sure any and all of you have had experience of trying to deal with social welfare or entitlements, or trying to secure things and not having success sometimes, and having things refused. So we're always trying to, impress upon any of these organisations and institutions, when opportunities come for reform, that they need to be more inclusive of realities. And for example, one area we talk about a lot is we would really love to have a structure where stroke survivors were in a position to return to work on a partial return basis, in terms of not having to give up their benefits directly or being able to easily access them if they did try to return to work and found it was too difficult. At the moment, we feel the system is quite prohibitive, and that people are afraid that they will lose what they've so hard won in terms of benefits if they're to try and advance and, take on a new role after their stroke. And that being said, we know that many people can't do that as well. But we're always trying to sort of put the scenario of the patient foremost in the minds of people who are doing the reforms. And we also advocate through alliances with other organisations. And in particular, I suppose I mentioned it earlier, for the stroke community, we're part of a wider alliance, which is the Neurological Alliance of Ireland. And that's where we work with a number of other charities who also represent conditions that have a neurological impact. And, those alliances can be very powerful when you're fighting for something that's right across the board beneficial to that patient community. As I mentioned, I work with the HSE Patient Forum, which is a collective of all different types of patient communities and conditions, where again, we're trying to put forward a generic patient advocacy agenda. And in Europe as well, we have different alliances, and where we, if you like, sing from the same hymn book around the issues that are important at a European level. I'm nearly done in case you're getting tired of me. Just to give you a kind of a little bit on the fruition of the work. And so much of it is ongoing, and so much of it takes, as I mentioned before, a lot of repetition and a lot of days out, so to speak, to try and get before audiences and repeat the message. But just to make you aware, I referenced it earlier, last year when we had a petition ask of our politicians in relation to supporting Irish Heart Foundation funding so we could keep stroke services and heart services like counselling and our peer groups and our courses going, because we knew that they were having a positive impact on the patient community, because we were hearing it back all the time. We did in collaboration with our patient champs have great success with that. And the upshot was, after being petitioned by many, many politicians following our signing, that the Minister for Health did ask for a meeting with the Irish Heart Foundation to figure out what we needed and how. And our Director of Advocacy, who had been petitioning for many years, I might say, in advance of all that too, at that meeting, gave the case about how these services were helping people feel empowered, feeling connected, and that was having a huge impact on health and well-being. And I kind of referenced it in my own experience, but I know that there are many others who've had the same. And so the Minister for Health at the time, Stephen Donnelly, did petition the Minister for Finance for money in the budget, and 600,000 was secured to keep the services going. So that was an example of how that collaboration with patients has been hugely beneficial to generating a positive outcome for stroke patients and heart patients. This year, 2025, I suppose our big win has been the Oireachtas Heart and Stroke Group. So what we did was basically went out and said to the politicians, we would really like if you would agree to become a champion, a political champion, if you like, for the cardiovascular or the heart and stroke community. And we got over 60 TDs and senators to sign up to that. And again, it was a collaborative ask. It was patients in the community, it was the organisation. The advantage of a group like this is that long after we present, they in Leinster House will be championing and asking the questions and pushing that agenda forward, because they have agreed that they will, that they see these as priority areas for their communities. And, it's great. We're also able to access the members of this group, because they've said we're encouraging you to keep us informed. We're able to access them on a whole number of subsequent meetings we have in relation to topics that come up, For example, in the next 2 weeks, it's 3 weeks, we will be having a meeting with them in Leinster House on the issue of women's cardiovascular care. And that's not to say the men aren't important. We know you're important, but traditionally, a lot of women are misdiagnosed or underdiagnosed because the I suppose heart and cardiovascular issues have not really been seen to be women's issues, despite the fact that they, are 6 times more likely to die from a cardiovascular issue than from breast cancer. But this is just not something widely understood. So we'll be in there petitioning on that. And we will have one of our stroke patient champions in there with us on the day, who will be talking about her experience of delayed diagnosis and the impact it had on her, and how to avoid this kind of scenario going forward. So that just gives you a flavour of some of the stuff that we are actually seeing the fruits of the labour on. And just to say, really, we continue to be committed to building this alliance of patients, professionals and politicians to achieve better for heart and stroke patient services in Ireland. And that's not just the services we provide. We would ideally love to see properly funded community services where people can have that social engagement piece in their local communities, where they can access their psychological supports in their communities, where they can, have that integration, in that they're not at a disadvantage because they live in one area or other, We will endeavour to always continue to provide these services online to our patients. And I know we do some in-person groups as well around the country for our stroke survivors, and we'll continue to try and do that. But we're advocating for better all the time, and we will continue to do it in every means we can. And I suppose I have to finally say,
Oh, Pauline, you've gone on mute there somehow.
sorry about that. So just when I was about to do my pitch for Patient Champions. So what I was going to say is, if any, I hope you saw the last slide where I was talking about the fact that we're continuing with this endeavour of building an alliance of patients, organisation, professionals and politicians. But it's really an invitation to say, if there are any stroke survivors watching today who, in seeing this, maybe think, gosh, I'd like to be part of something like that, you are more than welcome to send an email to ihfvolunteer@irishheart.ie and just title it Patient Champions, and we will put you in the pot for the next round of training on our Patient Champions programme. Basically, we run 10 sessions, online sessions, and we talk about all the areas that I've sort of briefly mentioned there. And people get to learn, what does it mean to be involved in the advocacy through the media, or advocacy through, political work or whatever. And you can pick and choose the areas of advocacy you like, or, you don't have to do everything. But you're more than welcome to email for information on the Patient Champions programme. And just to remind you, it's free, it's online, it's accessible from anywhere in Ireland once you have Wi-Fi, or you can even run it off a hotspot if you don't have Wi-Fi. And it really is not only an opportunity to kind of learn about advocacy, but to meet people who have conditions like you, but who are like-minded and wanting to do something constructive with everything that has happened in their lives, and to use their voices, and even to, find new purpose as a result of the painful journey they've been on. And I think it's, safe to say that the majority of our patient champion community, they feedback that it has actually provided them with a good, not only sense of being empowered themselves, but also in finding that purpose where so much maybe had been lost through to their stroke. So I will leave it at that. That's it for me, and I hope it's been helpful and encouraging. And I suppose I say, even for those who are not inclined towards advocacy themselves, just to know our job in the advocacy department in the Irish Heart Foundation and amongst our patient champion volunteers is to advocate for all. So we're representing and trying to represent as best as we can all our heart and stroke patient community. And that's beyond even those who are registered in our services. You know, I mentioned the figure of 600,000 people out there living. They all need representation, and we're endeavouring to do that. So don't feel that if you don't sign up to be part of it, that you're not. We're aiming to do the work on behalf of everyone as much as we can.